Hopefully there'll be people coming in now. Cool. Hi, everyone. If you've just arrived, welcome. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes so people can join. And if you have joined us, maybe you could let us know where you're joining from. And if you're a surfer, let us know your closest break to you, your nearest and dearest. If you're not by a break, you can tell us your favorite break. Mike, go. Hello. Maybe I need to enable the chat. Okay, we've got some breaks coming in. Cool. Okay, so we're gonna get started, and just to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, so I hope you're okay with that. And this session today is really a chance for us to get stoked, or even more stoked, about ocean science. My name is Natalie Fox, and I'm co-hosting this webinar with Juliana. And we met doing some marine citizen science, and this is really what Citizens of Surf is about, is to engage surfers in citizen science. So we're also joined by special guests Tony Butt, Pamela Buchan, Dave Whyte, and Linzi Hawkin, who are amazing water people, and they have a range of expertise across the surfing science advocacy and engagement sphere. So this is going to last about an hour, depending on how live the discussion is. So we'd really like you to ask any questions. And if you do want to ask a question, you can just use the Q&A box. Hopefully that's working. And if not, just let me know in the chat. And then we're going to move through the speakers. So really the discussion is going to come up at the end. There's going to be a chance for us to really talk about how surfers can get involved with ocean science. And obviously we'll be sharing the recording in a couple of days. So first of all, I just wanted to let you know a little bit more about what Citizens of Surf is. So it's a UN Decade of Ocean Science project. It's endorsed under the Early Career Ocean Professionals Programme. And so if you're new to the decade, and if you're not quite sure what the ECOP Programme is, they both have websites, and I can give you the links in the chat. So if you want, you can go and have a look afterwards. But hopefully you already start to know a little bit more about the UN Decade of Ocean Science. You might even have signed up through the Ocean Decade Network. And so we're heading into the 4th year of the Decade of Ocean Science, and it's really a global framework for us to bring lots of ocean sustainability projects, programs, initiatives, and people together, and to work towards the targets that are within Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water. So we really need to push forward for more funding, for more support, for more of a kind of unilateral working towards these goals, because people have been working pretty much segmented in different locations, in different silos. And so this is what the decade is about. It's really about bringing people together. So a little bit about Citizens of Surf. I'm just going to share my screen now. So this really came from my research dissertation project, which was looking at surfers and ocean sustainability. I used the framework of ocean literacy, because at the time we were struck by COVID and all the labs were closed. So I had to really make it about the social side of why surfers might be able to have a strong connection to the ocean. And so I ended up publishing a paper, some of the results here. So it was a strong number of coming out of it, that participants who took part who were all surfers, said that they surf to feel connected to the ocean, and that they also attribute a strong understanding to the ocean because of surfing, and they also value surf ecosystems due to surfing. So we also did some more qualitative data collection as well. So looking at what is it that surfers get out of surfing? Is it just for sport? Is it more about the emotional regulation, maybe more about mindfulness? So one of the participants was saying that reading waves actually slows them down and it makes them more mindful. And so I was using the surfing social ecological system to kind of break down these different components. And this is the framework that allows us to look at both environmental systems and human systems and how they interact. And so surfing is pretty unique in that there are lots of variables, lots of different interactions, and lots of different outcomes. So we're going to be looking less at the governance, but more about surfers as a social group, and more about surf ecosystems, what's happening within the areas that the waves that we surf are breaking. And these are some of the workshops that we've done already. So we worked with World Surf League in 2022, doing some kelp restoration initiatives. And then a couple of months ago, we ran our first eDNA workshop. So we were looking at finding out what species are present, hanging out in the surf breaks that we're in, using a sampling method that we could do whilst we were surfing, and we did it in the North Devon Surfing Reserve. So just had the results back from that, which is quite exciting. So with all that said, I'm going to pass on to Hula, and the connection between Julia and I, as I said, is that we came together through citizen science, even though we weren't on the same boat. But I'd really love to know a bit more about your background and your work, and also why you think citizen science is such an important pathway to getting involved in ocean sustainability.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Hope you hear me well. Yes? Cool. Okay, so yeah, my name is Juliana Corrales. Yeah, Hula for short. Thanks so much for the invite, Nat. This is like super relevant right now. But well, so about me, I am a Costa Rican ocean lover, designer, communicator, and conservationist. I basically love being in the ocean, trying to surf. I don't say that I'm very good, but trying to surf a wave. I love diving, sailing, yes, like anything you name it, and I'm there. So I currently focus my work on I work as a creative consultant with marine conservation initiatives or NGOs, basically helping them elevate their branding and communications in a way that truly represents the value and scale of the work. And I just synthesize it in this phrase, like uniting creativity with ocean conservation. But today, I want to talk briefly about my experience with citizen science and the benefit of working also in interdisciplinary environments. As you heard, like my background is very different. I am not a scientist. And how like this recipe has, has contributed on me bridging from the world of design and conservation, design and communications into marine science and conservation. So yeah, as I said, I've worked as a designer and communicator, but my passion for the ocean has led me to various different pathways and places. A long time ago, I took surf photography course. I did all of my diving licenses. So I've basically wanted to always be close and in or under or above the waves. And these, I've had the opportunity through this to work with professional surf photographers, marine biologists, even government representatives, journalists, all from different countries and backgrounds. Because I've not only worked in Costa Rica, I started here, but then I lived in Asia for a while. And so I've been able to show like the importance of what I do and how it complements their work. It took me a while to like I knew it deep in my heart, but it took me a while to be able to to show it, to be there and then learn was at the same time learning from their knowledge and expertise, but working together to have like a more meaningful output. One of the best examples of how I've done this is through science communication, collaborating with ocean scientists, helping them communicate their work to selected target audiences in a creative way. It can be creating posters, campaigns, interventions, always having like their target audiences in mind. Something that maybe for me as a communicator and designer is obvious, but maybe not for people in different areas of expertise. And then, so I've also, as Nat mentioned, I've been part of different citizen science projects, from coral reef monitoring in the Philippines to taking water samples in the South Pacific with X Expedition. We were analyzing like microplastics in the ocean, and basically we're on a sailboat taking samples like every day. And what stands out to me and like in my experience is that the actual doing the science and like the impact it has on the person. Like whilst being involved doing the science, you're there learning by doing, like being there hands-on gives you like a deeper understanding and a deeper connection. We are aware that like it's known that more knowledge doesn't necessarily lead to action, but in my case it did. Like as I knew more, I wanted to be more involved. Also because my background was so different. I was more in like the emotions. I've always felt connected in the ocean in a more like different way, but it did lead me to have a basically direct my life onto this kind of path of work. And then also the impact it has on the person doing it. Like citizen science is not just about the outputs of the science for us, like for the people involved that's in it, like of course for the science it is, but also for the people involved, like all the divers I saw while I was living in Asia and like while in X Expedition. For us, I think it gets to the heart also of like of ocean literacy, but it also takes us on to situations that creates a bond between people and environment, which I think is super important. I think it's in a way like it's similar to when you know someone on like a deeper level and you live experiences with them, you inherently feel closer to them and create a relationship with them. I think that's kind of like how it has been for me through my experiences. So yeah, they have all been life-changing experiences that guided my personal and professional life. So I think it's super valuable. But yeah, thanks so much, and back to you.
Thanks so much, Hula. So with that, we're going to go across to our first guest. So I'm really, really happy to introduce Tony, who is a big wave lifelong surfer and a Patagonia Surf Ambassador. So my joke about Tony is that he wrote the book on surf science because he did actually write a book on surf science, and he has a lot to share in a very short amount of time. And so, Tony, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you got into both surfing and oceanography and how they have complemented each other over the years. And welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Right. I haven't got a PowerPoint presentation or a PDF or anything like that because it will probably just explode if I try and put it on Zoom, but I've got a few props. Which I don't know if they might come out backwards, sort of things like this. You've given me 5 minutes to go through my whole life story, so I'm going to try and compress over 40 years in 5 minutes. So here we go. And it's about that. It's about the two things complement each other. So a bit of knowledge complements your experience, and a bit of experience complements your knowledge. That's what the whole thing's based on. So while I was at school, I absolutely hated school. I didn't get on very well at all, apart from when I was about 12, 13 years old, I decided that I liked physics. And at the same time, I discovered surfing. I don't know how I discovered surfing, because I ended up only being the only surfer in a school of 900. And the two things kind of started really complementing each other from then, really. And I didn't realize until years later. And one thing that happened was my dad bought me this book. I don't know if you can see it, The Science of Surfing. Does that come out backwards? No, it's good. Okay, so it was called The Science of Surfing, and it was written in 1972 by a guy called Rick Abbott. It's about 60 pages, but that was one of the key things that started the whole thing off for me, really. It was all about low pressures and where the waves come from and all that kind of thing. Surf science, basically. So when I left school, I didn't really do much for about 10 years. I kind of was just a surfer, just lived in a van, traveled around, tried to travel to all these places that surfers go to, like Hawaii and South Africa and places like that. And I lived in Cornwall in England at the time. But really, all the way through, I felt that it wasn't really quite enough just to be a surfer. You know, I wanted to know all about the waves and where they came from and a bit more of that stuff that I'd read years before in that book. So after I'd just bummed around for about 10 years, I actually had the chance to go back to college and study ocean science in University of Plymouth. And interestingly, I couldn't have done that before anyway, because that course didn't exist before. So it was just came at the right time, really. And I was ready for it. And I had all these questions that I that were building up in my mind about low pressures and waves and how waves break and where they come from and all that kind of thing. And that was fantastic. That was 3 years of just knowledge, just sucking in all this knowledge and reading all these books. And it was like, it didn't seem like any effort at all. It was just marvelous. And luckily I was invited to do a PhD. And the PhD was on coastal morphodynamics. So that's how the waves affect the morphology, the shape of the coastline, coastal erosion, that kind of thing, which is also really relevant if you're a surfer, because if you surf on beach breaks, then the beach moves with the waves. So you learn about that kind of thing as well. And it's also got a kind of an application for general society, because the waves come in and they wash away the coastline, and then people's houses fall in the sea. So that was a kind of the commercial application for that. And at the same time as I was doing my PhD, I also discovered, or maybe a bit before that, really, I discovered that I liked bigger waves than other people, especially people in England. Big wave surfing wasn't really very trendy or anything in those days, and I've always wanted to do something different. And I didn't like crowded surf lineups, and I'm not a very competitive person, so big wave surfing seemed perfect for me at that time. And I discovered that I could get on the ferry from the University of Plymouth, and get down to northern Spain really easily, sometimes taking all my books and everything with me on the ferry. And I discovered this. I didn't discover it. I wasn't the first person to surf it, but I discovered it for myself. This one wave, it's called Menyakoth. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it in the north. It's in the Basque Country. And there's also Guéteri, which is, sorry, my French isn't very good. That's also a good big wave spot. And so I used to get the ferry down to there, and at the same time as I was doing my PhD. And one day, while I was actually in the water at Menyakoth, an idea came to me about my PhD research. There was big waves, and it was about the sort of the shape and the characteristics of big waves and the way they erode the coastline. And I don't think I could have got that idea if I hadn't actually been in the water, actually surrounded by big waves. And that particular idea, it was about these things called infragravity waves. I don't know, again, if anybody's heard of those, but that was one of the things it was one of the cornerstones of my actual PhD research. So it helped me. So I could say that surfing big waves actually helped me to get my PhD. Then I went on after my PhD, and I ended up doing 7 years part-time postdoctoral research, which I think is a record because people only normally do a year and then they get a proper job. But I did 7 years part-time, and I was actually living in the Basque Country then, right next to that Wavemakers. And one day I had a phone call from a guy called Alex from a magazine called The Surfer's Path. This is the Surfer's Path magazine. Again, I don't know if anybody remembers it. And he wanted me to write an article for that magazine about surf science, about where the waves come from, low pressures, all that kind of thing. So I said, yeah, I'll write an article. And then actually in the article, I said, this is the first of a series of articles that I kind of took the liberty of saying that. And it was the first of a series of articles. And I ended up working for the Surfer's Path for 17 years after that. And I ended up writing this book, which, thank you very much for saying this. It's not the book on surf science, because there's the other one before, sort of like 30 years before that. But anyway, I managed to write this book, which has been relatively, I don't know what a successful book is, but I managed to sell a few copies and people still talk about it all those years later. So that was, and it was really enjoyable doing it. I forgot to show, this is a picture of me surfing Menyakoth. Oops, there you go. I don't know if it looks like a left for me, but it's actually a right. And then after I did all these surf science articles and I wrote the book, and you know, when you're sort of involved in it like that, you start to become aware of the environmental problems that are surrounding you. You're right in there. You're on the front line, so you're on the beach every day, and then you can't help but hear about what's going on with climate change and sea level rise and storminess and all that kind of thing. So my articles in the Surfer's Path, still inside that 17 years that I worked for the Surfer's Path, they started to morph into more environmental articles rather than science articles. And I had a column in there. It was called Land, Sea and Sky. And my articles, what's that? This one's about, global warming, as they used to call it. Now it's called the climate catastrophe or climate crisis or climate emergency. So I started writing environmental articles, and then I was invited. So now we're about 10 years ago I was invited by some surfing NGOs, if you can call them that, which were just sort of starting to get off the ground. The global wave protection movement to protect surfing waves from being destroyed. Save the Waves, Surfers Against Sewage, the Surfrider Foundation, one in Portugal called Salvemos Surf, New Zealand Surf Break Protection Society, Surfers for Climate in Australia. So I started working with all these, and there's loads more NGOs, basically trying to protect the coastline and surfing waves, like using surfing waves as a kind of indicator species. So if the surfing wave goes down, then there's a problem with the entire ecosystem of the coastline. So I did lots of talks, still do, on lots of panels, events like this one. Still doing that. And then also Patagonia came along, which was really, really good. They support me. They keep me alive while I'm doing these kinds of things. So if I need to go down to Portugal and do a talk, thankfully Patagonia will support me. Patagonia, it says surf activists, I think, or something. And still doing that. Somebody said, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to sound, but a friend of mine said, that's a marriage made in heaven. So all the work I was doing and being a surfer as well, and then Patagonia came along, that was absolutely perfect. Then I worked when the Surfer's Path finished, unfortunately, in 2014. Shortly afterwards, I was invited to work for a website called Magic Seaweed, and I worked for them for 5 years doing surf science and trying to sneak in as many environmental articles as I could. Now they've been gobbled up by another large website called Surfline, so that's a bit up in the air at the moment. And that's where we are, really. So the challenge that what I need is now is more help trying to persuade or trying to convince surfers that this idea of studying the sea and knowing a little bit about the sea will enhance your experience while you're in the sea, and then it's like a feedback loop. It's a vicious circle. Then being in the sea will also help you to understand what's going on. So the two things complement each other, and it's like more than the sum of its parts. If you can have those two things, you know, the whole thing can be a lot more fulfilling. But the problem is to communicate this to other surfers, and that's where I need more ideas, really. That's where we are. Thank you. I don't know if I did that in 5 minutes.
A little bit longer, but we'll let you off. You've got a lot to cover there. So thank you, Tony. It's a great way to leave it as well, saying that, you know, where do we go from here? We've got this connection between the ocean and surfing, and it's about people as well. So someone who's going to help us learn a little bit more, at least tell us what she's learning about people and how they connect with marine environments, is Pamela. So Pamela, I'm going to head over to you. Maybe you can just introduce yourself, what you do, and yeah, tell us about what you've been researching, because this is super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Are you able to share the couple of slides? I don't need them immediately.
Yes, I'll start sharing.
That'd be great. Thank you. So thanks so much for inviting me. I'm Pamela Buchan, and I'm currently a marine social scientist at Exeter University in the UK. But like others, I've had quite a bit of a mixed background with marine biology, doing charity work and science communication, being a politician. And the kind of underlining theme of everything for me is loving the sea, loving being in the sea, mostly snorkeling, bodyboarding, sadly not surfing. I don't think my balance is up to it, but generally getting in as much as I can. And that's really what's driven my research. I did a PhD, which I completed a couple of years ago, which was really building on this love of the sea and wanting to understand how others could love it and want to care for it in the same way. And so that research was focused on marine citizenship and brought out this concept of marine identity. So I'm going to introduce these two concepts to you, and hopefully it will be useful for our discussion today. So first of all, I want you to think about the ocean, and what do you picture when you think of it? Do you think of how you love the sea life and the thought of it going about its business out of sight? Or is it the way the light plays on the ocean surface and how it can be sparkling or deep azure or brooding grey? Is it the sound that the waves make when they drain through a shingle beach, or the boom of waves crashing against a cliff face? Or do you think of being in the water, maybe the stillness of a snorkel in a lagoon, or as a community of surfers feeling the power of the current and the waves? Or maybe being by the water and being with other people who are sharing the connection with the ocean. There are so many different ways to connect to the sea, and place attachment is the term we use for this kind of emotional connection that we can feel to a place. Usually it's our hometown or local area, but in my research, I found that it could also be to the sea as a kind of place. So not just the local sea, but any sea, and this is called thalassophilia. Any sea will do, but you have to be by the sea. And that's really the start of this journey towards marine citizenship. When the emotional attachment grows into a need and you're really dependent on the sea to work or surf for your emotional regulation or your well-being, that marine place dependency means that the sea is really required for you. And the chances are that that's become a part of a sense of your marine identity. Could you click on? So marine identity is an identity rooted in the way in which the ocean as a place supports the sense of self. So this means understanding who you are and the sea being part of that. It might be being a fisherman, a marine biologist, a coastal resident, or a surfer, or it might be less tangible than that and be more about the ache in your heart when you've not visited the sea for a few days. But it's really important because identities can really drive our actions, especially when they get threatened. How do you feel when you can't surf because the water is too polluted? Or if you don't see the same sea life anymore because the warming waters are changing where it's able to live? or when your seaside town turns brown from floodwaters for yet another time this year as the storms are becoming more extreme and more frequent. And it's these moments when marine identity is threatened and that people are then motivated to take action and become marine citizens. Can we move on, please? So marine citizenship is exercising the right to participate in the transformation of the ocean for sustainability. And there's two parts to this: responsibilities and rights. So people often feel more familiar with the idea of responsibilities. We're told all the time about our individual actions, how we should take care of the environment, how we should buy sustainable products, reduce our carbon footprint, reuse, recycle, all those sorts of things that are very familiar. And they are important actions that individuals can do in their everyday lives. But it's also easy to feel like they don't really make much difference to the grand scheme of what's happening globally, or to feel limited in what we can achieve as individuals because of the huge systems that we live within that are just beyond our reach. So marine citizenship, though it includes these individual actions, also goes further to include collective and political actions. So things like petitioning and campaigning for policy change on marine environmental matters, getting involved in citizen science so you can gather knowledge and evidence about the ocean and impacts upon it, and coming together to make an impact locally where we live by forming marine groups or beach clean groups. Importantly, this also includes sharing the ocean with people, not just teaching our family and friends and work colleagues about the challenges that the ocean faces, but also sharing our feelings about the sea, engaging them in why we want to ensure its recovery and sustainability. So society is constructed by people, so change is made when enough people want to see it happen. And pushing for change is a two-way process, because marine citizens can only have the impact that we're going for if decision makers are listening, and that's where the rights come into it. So it's not very well known, but the Rio Declaration in 1992 included a commitment to environmental participatory rights, and that means the right to be involved in decisions that are made about the environment. It's been translated into binding legislation around the world, and there are three core pillars to what these rights are. The first is the right to environmental information, so that we should understand and know what's happening. And the second is the right to participate in environmental decision making, so being involved, not even just consultation, but having a real say. And then the third is the right to environmental justice, so that if something goes wrong, there's a way to get some kind of redress for that challenge. But somehow it seems to get forgotten that the ocean is the environment too. This tends to focus on land, and the ocean decision making seems to be out of sight and out of mind. Even at the coast, quite often the decisions are beyond the reach of, say, the local government that's there, just because of where their jurisdiction ends. And that normally it's the local government when people can get involved more easily. So the kind of parting message is that as well as fighting for our ocean and for ocean sustainability, we also need to remember to fight for our marine citizenship rights, so that our individual and collective voices are heard, and we can help move society along the road of transformation of humanity's relationship with the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. That is so great to hear you sum it up, because I've also read a lot of your work, Pam, and to hear it spoken like that is really eloquent and really beautiful and profound. So thank you. And moving on to Dave next as well, it's quite the perfect kind of jump towards saltwater citizenship as well, because this is your work now, Dave. So Dave is a postdoctoral researcher at Mare SIF Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine at the University of College Cork in Ireland. And I've also read a lot of your work, and you're now working with a citizen engagement program within the EU. So Dave, I'd love to hear your thoughts that have kind of stemmed from your research, and have, do you think that surfers are actively kind of championing their rights as marine citizens, or is there more for them to do? And do you think surfers could be a great example of marine citizens?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for having me. And it's been really interesting to hear the other speakers so far. I'd love to hear from Tony later, maybe whether you surfed Mullaghmore or the cliffs in Ireland, or you'll have to take a visit if not. Oh, great stuff. But so yeah, I mean, I suppose yeah, you wanted me to think about whether surfers care about the ocean spaces and maybe care enough to do something about that. I suppose I think many surfers care very deeply. Maybe all surfers care deeply, but whether or not that's care enough to take action, I think is a bit more complex. So I'm always kind of struck by the fact that I'm a surfer and I love the ocean, but I find it difficult to think of another amateur practice that's potentially as polluting as surfing. So between, the petroleum products in neoprene wetsuits and the wax we use on surfboards, the fact that surfboards are made across the other side of the world and have to be brought to you, the amount of car travel and air travel that surfers do. So, in just the daily practice of surfing, it's quite polluting. Now, there is no doubt though that being in that environment and that surfers the kind of through the relationship that they create with the kind of coastal environment, that they do gain a kind of an appreciation for it through their practice. And I think that's kind of how it's that kind of intimate connection, engaging with that and using that as a kind of a basis for ocean literacy with other people, and then kind of bringing surfers further with it with their own I suppose activist engagement maybe, where the kind of secret lies. So one thing that surfers do very well, and there's lots of examples around the world, is that they're very effective engaged at opposing damaging coastal developments. And there's been a recent example of this in Ireland. I mean, there's so many around the world when they threaten waves. And I think that for non-surfers, this is quite a unique, I suppose, narrative to come at, an environmentally destructive practice from, because I don't think that many non-surfers realize the kind of depth of the relationship between surfers and specific waves. Like I think I've from talking to non-surfers about this subject during my own research, I think a lot of people think that waves are just a kind of random chaotic thing that happens at the coast. There's a storm and there's waves and go and surf wherever there's waves kind of thing. But that's not really at all how surfers see it. There's between, and I'm sure Tony knows a lot more about this than I do, but the bathymetry at the coast, like the shape of the coast, or whether it's made of rock or sand, depending on where the swell comes from, means that there's very specifically shaped waves appear at different locations. And through years of practice, surfers gain a really kind of intimate relationship with those places. And so, I think that's something that coastal develop, putting a seawall in one place versus putting a seawall in another. If you don't surf, that's not something that you'll kind of immediately know. And I think the language of surfing, the language of the relationship with surfing also kind of lends, an interesting voice to that uniqueness. I mean, what are we doing when we're surfing? Is you're looking for storms to be given birth, or sorry, waves that are birthed in storms, and then you've come up with a way of channeling that energy. You can commune with the energy of the storm as the wave dies at the coast, and it's just this fantastic kind of intimate connection with the whole environment. Coast, water, land, storms out at sea, conditions further inland. To do that. And I think that kind of language is, it's a very kind of evocative one, because often when we think of the ecosystem, or when people think of ecosystems, I think you think of living things. But we know here the importance of ecosystems is much more than living things. It's kind of the system itself that supports all those things that are alive. And so I think surfers have a unique language capable of describing that and kind of arguing for it. So there's that kind of aspect of surfing ocean literacy. I think that can be useful to kind of argue with non-surfers for coastal ecosystems. But then also I think that, and like Tony was saying, I think we can also work with surfers to kind of increase to increase their other types of ocean literacy, to help them better engaged with keeping coastal ecosystems well. So for instance, what scientists know is things like the role of sea gas in binding sandbanks, the sandbanks that create the waves at beaches further in, and that surfers mightn't have such a knowledge of. So I think things like this and this creation, the kind of sharing of knowledge between user groups, because ocean scientists are one user group of the ocean, surfers are another. Sometimes we're both, like Tony. And I think it's that sharing of knowledge and the kind of building a broad version of ocean literacy, not just the scientific, but kind of a very ocean literacy in a broad sense, that will help us all kind of protect the coastal ecosystems a little bit better. So yeah, I hope that a long-winded answer of saying they might be, they might not.
Needs more investigation.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. And we'll definitely have some questions further on, but we're going to head over to Linzi. And Linzi, you've done a lot of work with many people and also many levels of surfers and different ways of interacting with people. So I wonder if you would just introduce yourself and what you think are the key kind of experiential pieces of work that you've done in this area. And yeah, what do you think as well, building on what Dave said about the language, how can we kind of change or at least up level and increase our language so that we encourage activism and advocacy and not just, you know, this love? Like, how can we make it more active?
It's such a big question. Thank you. So yeah, I am based in Jersey in the Channel Islands. So I think if you grow up on a small island, the marine ecosystem is kind of in your DNA, or at least that's how it feels to me. And so I'm really lucky that the ocean has played a really big role in my career. And right now I'm the co-founder of an agency called Protect Blue. So we are a very niche agency in that we only work in the ocean space. So we work with predominantly NGOs. So it sounds very similar to what Hula does, working with NGOs and ocean organizations to help them tell better stories, to help them create more impact. We do quite a lot of work in the education space as well, building ocean and blue curriculum. And lots of storytelling work. And then on the flip side of that, we're also really interested in how to help ocean activists create more impact in the work that they do and help and build their sense of agency and their efficacy in the work that they're doing. So it's really interesting to kind of look at both sides. But I think when, you know, I was really intrigued in your answer, David, about you know, how active are surfers in this space and are they doing a good job? And you know, I always reflect on my own experiences here in Jersey and other places of, you know, when I show up at a beach clean here, or if I organize something related to ocean conservation here, I rarely see the same people that I see in the car park when I'm going for a surf. And it sort of breaks my heart. And I wish that wasn't my answer, but that is my experience. And similarly, you know, when I've been lucky enough to go to, you know, a Surfers Against Sewage rep meeting, I look around the room and I see a similar group of people, like amazing, incredible ocean activists, but not necessarily the same people that I'm seeing in the surf all the time. So I'm really curious as to why that is. And I think things are changing. Tony, you said something really interesting, you know, that you were talking about a book that really influenced you. And for me, there was a book when I was growing up surfing called The Book of Waves. I've looked for it again and I cannot find it, but it had the most beautiful cross sections of the ocean and it showed different waves around the world and what it looked like under the surface. And I spent many years running a surf school over here, and one of the things that we would always do is teach kids about where waves come from and really basic oceanography. And what I really noticed is a few years back, I was asked by a surf school here to do a little bit of training for their surf coaches. And so I kind of dusted off all my notes from back in the days of teaching kids all this stuff. And I was teaching this group of surf coaches, like, here's how to talk about rip currents. Here's how to talk about, you know, how to predict when the surf's coming. And what I realized was that this group of kind of 20-something surfers, all great coaches, were looking at me with absolute disbelief because they didn't need to know where waves come from or how to predict when the surf was coming. Like, I remember me growing up was like looking in the newspaper at the synoptic chart and having to learn what those things meant. And so I think there has been a disconnection between surfers and science because we sort of don't need it, unfortunately, anymore. We just go onto our phones and check the surf and we don't even think about why those waves are coming. And the other really big piece for me is around role models. I think it's slowly changing, thank goodness. And I'm starting to see more surfers step up into that space. But again, you know, surfing is this hugely aspirational thing, and it's, you know, very much focused on, you know, we spend a lot of time looking at these incredible people surfing these amazing waves, and the more those people can step up and show their advocacy, the more that will influence everyone else a little bit further down the scale, especially the younger kind of generations. And I did some work a while back with Surfing Australia, and we were sort of exploring the question of what does it mean to be a good surfer? And I know that I'm hoping the answer to that question is changing, because for a long time, what it meant to be a good surfer was just like you were the guy or the girl out the back that was getting the best waves. And I think it's slowly changing. I think there's like the old guard who are clinging on to the old version of what a good surfer means. But I think we need to do more work in that space. I think we need to tell better stories. It's been interesting seeing, you know, a lot of people step up and start talking about chopu and what's happening right now with the coral reef. And but I think the key is finding something relevant in your own backyard. You know, sometimes we step up only when things are going wrong in our own backyard. And so if there's an opportunity for people to become more engaged in what's happening at home and step into that kind of role model space at home, I think it's really valuable.
That's amazing. Thank you, Linz. And thanks for mentioning something really current that's happening at the moment. Maybe this is something that we want to bring up in the discussion. If anyone's got any thoughts about this, this structure that's going to be built on the reef, a new structure that's going to be built on the reef in Chopu for the Olympics. Hopefully it won't, but let's see what happens. But for now, I want to just put it back to the participants. So I'm going to launch a poll. We want to ask a few questions about you. And it might run quite quickly. So you have to be ready for it. Okay, I'm going to launch the poll. There's 3 questions. And hopefully everyone can see it. Let me know in the chat if it is a problem. So far, 0% have participated. 1 person has done it. So, yeah, that's it. Keep going if you can see the poll, and then we'll move through the questions. So this is just to kind of get you thinking about that connection between surfing and between science. So we want to know what sort of surfer you are. We also want to know how involved you are in marine science. And then also we want to know, what are you interested in? Do you have any concerns? So we're just I'm going to leave it open a little bit longer. But basically, most of the people here are surfers, lifelong, like strong, like really into surfing, let's say. Okay. I can't get to the next question. Okay. We're going to move on to some questions from the audience for our guests. So we have one.
Do you want us to call it? I can see the next questions. Like, do you want me to? Yeah. Just to let you know. So it looks like also most people have either taken part in a marine citizen science initiative before, or are researchers.
Okay.
That's quite interesting. And then the last one was, what do you think citizens of surf should be collecting data on? There's a broad range, everything. But the most popular ones are microplastics, social aspects of surfing, coastal development, and monitoring of local ecology and habitats.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I don't know why I couldn't see that. That's really interesting.
If you just scroll down, you just tried scrolling down.
There we go.
Scroll down.
Got it. Cool.
Just got it too.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions for our guests. And so yeah, we're going to start with the questions. And if you have anything that you'd like to specifically ask someone, just pop it in the Q&A. But we've already had someone in the chat as well. So this is really, this is directed to Dave. Do you have any sort of research on the number of surfers taking steps to maintain or improve their breaks? And this can also be related to your work with Prep for Blue, because I saw that your colleague also posted how many surfing citizen science projects there are. So yeah, have you come across many surfers through that work?
Yeah, so that, like as Jan was saying, if that's 19 projects they found that included surfers, that's out of more than 1,000. So about 1,000. So obviously that number is quite low. What I would say from doing 2 years of research with surfers and talking to surfers and hanging out with surfers is I would say that I'm not so sure. So I think general identification and love of the ocean, I would say, is much higher among surfers, kind of, and you'd expect that. But I'm not sure whether the percent, like the actual kind of activist element, is any different from society broadly. So I can't really put an exact percentage on it, but I would say that surfers and everybody else are about the same in terms of actually actively doing anything.
So yeah, so thank you. And also kind of going on from there, so Mike is also working in this field and has been for a long time, Mike from Cease Trees and Sustainable Surf. So is there any data on the effectiveness of identity-based behavior change programs? So maybe this is more geared towards Pam or Linzi. So, but also you, Dave. I mean, it can be anyone, but he's looking for data. So,
shall I go first? All right. Yeah. Okay. So that's such a good question. And the answer is no, if we're talking about marine identity, because it's super new. We're still figuring it out. Dave will know we've been doing some work in the past year or so, talking about marine identity and trying to characterize it, try to understand how it might operate and how it might operate both for or potentially even against sustainability, depending on what the kind of shape of marine identity is. So this is really, really super new. So there's no data yet, though I personally hope that will be projects in the future that will be looking at that. More generally, there is certainly lots of research, though I won't be able to kind of quote specific data at you, but lots of research around identity more generally and how it can be kind of like operational, like the actual motivation for making changes and taking action. And in some ways you can see it without the studies just by looking around at some of the big social things that have been happening in different countries when it becomes, I'm going to use the word identity politics, but that is because it's people's sense of self being challenged, and then that, you know, that can really create quite a strong sentiment and a strong drive, not always in the way that we want it to, depending on what our personal politics are, but there's definitely lots of evidence around that. But maybe others have kind of other experiences in the kind of non-academic or academic, maybe. If that's something I don't know about, please let me know.
Anyone want to add to that? Thanks, Pam. I think it's really good. And actually, we're going to just go across to a question that maybe links a little bit to the identity side, which Christina has put in the chat about diversity and inclusion. So this is kind of more around barriers and accessibility. And so I would say ocean science and surfing is similar, and that it is it's not available for everyone to participate in. And so what do you think we can kind of do? I mean, Christina is also looking at collecting data. Is there data on making it more inclusive? And also, what can we do to kind of remove the barriers so that it's more accessible for minority and marginalized groups to get involved in both surfing and citizen science? Who
Can I go first on that one, maybe?
Sure.
So fantastic comment, I think, first of all. And yeah, that's absolutely so true. There's still major barriers in surfing. Just for anyone interested, Rebecca Olive has done a lot of work on this, especially in terms of gender and the barriers for female surfers in breaking into the industry. But I think there's a lot. I mean, so citizen science and Citizens to Surf, I think, could play a role here. It would be, like you were saying, social aspects. It would be fantastic to have a lot of data points around the coasts on any one day, how many women and how many non-white surfers are surfing at any one time, because that's something that I think, you know, is done kind of as part of research projects, but on an ongoing basis, a really good idea of it would be really useful. And it's amazing how much is, like, I mean, I can talk, you know, the gender thing, especially in Ireland, it's amazing how from one spot to the next, or from one region in Ireland to the next, that completely changes. Like, I rarely surf with women in Cork, but if I go 2 hours up the coast, it's much more balanced. And it's just interesting. I don't know why that is. It would be interesting to find out. And in terms, you know, outside of, so I think citizen science as well, and this also comes into the project that I'm currently working at, in citizen science groups and clubs especially, I think, could play a key role in increasing gender and diversity in the people in the water by specifically targeting communities, different communities, in their activities and in their outreach, and actively looking for them outside of their usual pool of people who take part. And then I think, you know, at a bigger level, there's things like, female prize money in surfing was matched with the men's prize money. I think that was 2 years ago. That's a fantastic step forward to see, and that, you know, that's a major barrier. It's things like that then at the kind of more structural level, I think, are really important. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, go Linz.
Yeah, I'm going to add something, and I feel like I may be stepping outside of the surfing lane, so apologies. But I also think in terms of making things more exclusive, it's about helping people understand that you can be an ocean activist even if you don't live on the coast. We ran something called C7 for Finisterre a couple of years ago, which was like an ocean activist training camp. And before we did it, we were really lucky that we were able to sort of dip into their audience, which is quite a big audience, and ask the question, what's the biggest barrier for you in regards to being an ocean activist? And the overwhelming answer was, well, I don't live by the sea, so I can't be. And so I think a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to shift from this really concentrated like ocean stories to blue stories and water stories, and helping people understand that even if you live in the city, you can still be a surfer, you can still be an ocean activist, and kind of help connect those dots. And I think that also helps with the like inclusivity of becoming a surfer, that you don't just have to live in an affluent coastal town to be a surfer, that identity can look different for everyone.
Yeah, and I think in terms of ocean activism or people working on behalf of the ocean, we're in a critical time. So we really need to reach broader communities and connect them to it, and also be able to bring them into the ocean space, and not it's really been, I was going to say, it's been quite an exclusive space for a while, surfing, this kind of it's elitism, because you do need to you have to be the best surfer, but we're going to move to some kind of different style questions now. One is really about data, so, and the methodology of collecting data and doing some citizen science. So other fields that are out there. So this is from Jan. So Jan is already, I think, working in citizen science, so is maybe a little bit more knowledgeable. So saying also, why would surfers not help scientists in that field? I think so. There was a meeting between lifeguards. Maybe Jan, do you want to kind of talk about it? Would you feel happy to come? Yeah, you're okay. I'm going to allow you to talk so that you can actually hopefully have the microphone. Does that work?
I think, have you let in the wrong person?
Oh.
There we go.
Unmute. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Okay. Go
Okay.
for it. Maybe Jan, you can share your story, what you said in the chat.
Yeah, well, we've been involved in quite some citizen science, but also interactions between water sports enthusiasts and scientists. And one of those remarkable meetings I joined was by beach guards, lifeguards in Belgium, and they had a problem. And the problem was that some morphology has changed on the Belgian coast because of all kind of nourishment, sand nourishment on the beach, leading to different currents, leading to safety and security problems. And they asked some help from scientists, wave scientists, physicians who should know all about waves. But we brought them together. So, and then you must see like people coming from the beach, like sportive guys who know how to swim and do things like that. And then the opposite side of the table, the boring scientists building models, theoretical models about waves. But what was so striking is that I would think that those professors would know everything about waves, and they know a lot about waves. They can build all kinds of formulas, whatever, but they are still very much constrained in what they do in shallow water. That's what I learned. So most of these models work perfectly well in deep water, but once those waves come in very shallow water, you have a problem because it becomes all chaotic. And what I hear from Tony and many others of you is that this is exactly your knowledge as surfers. You know exactly how waves work, even in shallow waters, because that's the place where you go. So I was thinking if you could have some kind of device, an easy device, your position, and you do your work in those waves, that this could probably help modeling the waves that now the professors are not really good in. And try to imagine how you would have to do it otherwise. If you are a professor, can you put some kind of buoy in that shallow water to measure it? It's quite hard, not easy. But if you have many surfers all around the world who have that device and make sure that the data, the very detailed position goes to some kind of data portal, I don't know, this can lead to an enormous amount of data, new data that are not available right now. This is just an idea that popped up in my mind because of that meeting and because of your expertise. And so my first thing was that do not try to stick to the usual stuff. And that's always plastic litter, because it all affects us. We don't like it. That's the same for scientists and for water sports enthusiasts. And that's the easy solution. But there is so much more surfers can contribute, because indeed you speak the language of the ocean. You know the ocean very well. And if you can assist in a way and in a field that is even more special, where you are so much familiar with, that could open a door, a gateway to don't know what kind of knowledge. But I think there's still scope for growth.
That's really great, Jan. And actually, this is what Citizens of Surf is hoping to do. We're not designing any projects as yet. We're hoping to co-design and collaborate with different groups. So nothing is set in stone, and it's really about speaking to those in different places and in different fields, and also especially local communities, and seeing how we can work together. So I think that's a great point. Thanks for giving us that example as well. Tony, go for it.
I don't know how to do that thing, that yellow hand. I can't seem to find it. Anyway, that's brilliant. Brilliant observation there, Jan. When I was mostly, doing my PhD, but then when I was doing those 7 years of postdoctoral research on coastal geomorphology and morphodynamics, I found that kind of thing happening all the time. That these guys are really clever, but they don't. You got there's this sort of separation between really, really good mathematicians and physicists that understand all the theory and can make mathematical models, but some of them don't know how to swim, and then surfers who are in the sea every day in exactly the same, we call it the surf zone and the swash zone. So they're right in there, exactly the same place as these other guys have been studying. but they don't really seem to want to, or they don't feel the need to actually read any books and go any further and study it any further. But if you could somehow combine the two types of knowledge together, I'm not saying that those guys need to learn how to swim and those guys need to buy a load of books and read them, but just combine the two sorts of knowledge that the whole that both of those groups of people have got, then you know, I think we might be able to get somewhere, or we might not. It might be impossible. I studied coastal morphodynamics for 10 years and didn't really get anywhere, really. Even though I was a surfer as well, it might be one of those things that's just beyond our reach as a species. Might be just too complicated to understand.
Maybe it's one we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm gonna wrap up with just the last little kind of topic that Andre is bringing up, and he is talking about the environmental impacts of surfing, and it's also another kind of version of the question that Daniel has put in the chat. So in terms of what the kind of impacts that surfing has on the environment, and then the behaviors that surfers portray to kind of keep up their surfing endeavors, what can we kind of do to shift that towards being more pro-environmental? So do you have any thoughts? I mean, it would be great to see some kind of hopeful answers. Go for it, Tony.
Yeah, sorry to come in twice on that. Yeah, I thought about this for a long time, and you know, surfing intrinsically is a sort of sustainable activity. We don't destroy the wave by surfing it. We take a tiny amount of energy and we use it to get fun out of it. So it should be sort of an ideal activity. But then there's all the paraphernalia that goes around that, all, as you say, all the flying, all the stuff that we buy, and including what we eat as well. And so, you know, especially with travel, I think travel's one of the easiest things to, it's one of the things that is most in your face when you think about the surfing lifestyle. You know, you've got to go and surf other waves around the world and meet other surfers and other surfing cultures and all that kind of thing. And then you fly, and that's one of the worst things you can do for the environment. Recently, you know, I've been looking for strategies to try to reduce surfers' environmental footprint in a sort of painless sort of way. And you can sometimes you can say that doing things in a more sustainable way can be more fun. So it's like a win-win situation. So like a lot of trips I did like 20 and 30 years ago, you know, with 5 people in a car. I didn't have a clue about the environment or anything, but we didn't have any money, and we didn't manage to find that many really photogenic waves or anything like that. But those trips now, thinking about them all those years later, were the best memories I've got, you know, in my life, even though it was like much more sustainable. And then recently I've done these sort of strike missions where you go somewhere for a couple of days and it costs like, for 2 days, it costs the same amount as it would have cost for 6 months. And those memories just kind of fade away. They you know, it's all airports and hotels. And so it's not necessarily one, you know, it's not the more money you spend and the more you destroy the environment doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have more fun. In fact, in some ways, it's the opposite. It's negatively correlated.
Thanks, Tony. And Linzi, you've got your hand raised as well. Do you want to?
I don't know how to unraise it now, but yeah, I was just going to add. I mean, to add to what Tony was saying is making this other version of surfing aspirational. I think it's really interesting, and you know, definitely in the time that I've been surfing in cold water has become more aspirational. So that's great for those of us who live in fairly cold places, because it's helping people get excited about surfing in their own backyard more than traveling loads. But also, you know, I know that we saw a message pop up from Michael from Sustainable Surf. I think there's a lot happening in the space right now in regards to the materials that are being used with boards. So the Eco Board project is an amazing resource for any surfers to be able to look at how their boards are being made and choose, you know, if you are buying a new board, like choose a shaper who's actually being intentional about the materials that they're using. And equally, you know, we're about to see the launch of The Big Sea, the film that's coming out around neoprene. So I think it's happening. You have to be willing to do your homework a little bit. And right now there are times where you might have to spend a little bit more money. So it's not always super accessible for everyone. But I think there are people doing really good work trying to make these options available for more people and to kind of shift the really big players in the industry into much more sustainable practices. So I think we just need to keep championing those folk.
Yeah, exactly. And Dave, do you want to go as well?
Yeah, maybe just a quick anecdote from Ireland. So if anyone wants some inspiration on how to make their surfing more sustainable, I put the growing Fergal Smith into the chat. If you just type that in and look up the YouTube videos, Fergal Smith, I think, is the gold standard for how to be an environmentally pro-environmental surfer. So during the early noughties, he was a professional surfer, and he just became disillusioned with the kind of the lavishness of the lifestyle and the traveling around the world, you know, and the kind of self-centeredness of it all. So he gave up flying and lost his sponsorship because of it. And so still to this, you know, 10 years later, 12 years later, does not fly to surf. And now he has started a very successful community-owned farm, Moyhill Community Farm project in the west of Ireland. So it's all community supported, and anyone can go there and do some work and get a box of food from it. But the series is it's really fun. It's just very short episodes of their life setting up the farm and surfing around Clare in Ireland. So I'd say you should check it out.
Yeah, it's great. He's definitely the go-to in how to do it, how to let go of flying and just keeping it local, really. So yeah, great example. Cool. So yeah, just wondering if there's any last questions, anything anyone would like to say in terms of kind of what's coming up in the following year. I mean, is there anything that you want to say, Pam, about engaging surfers in the Decade of Ocean Science? Because Citizens of Surf is part of the Decade of Ocean Science, and so far I would say that not that many people outside of the Decade of Ocean Science know about it. So the hope is that through engaging surfers in Citizens of Surf, we can also bring them towards the Decade of Ocean Science. And it's kind of this pathway. So yeah, is there anything that you can say about bringing people on board to that?
I can have a couple of words, just thinking about, so not knowing how much anybody really knows about the decade. It's kind of based on these 10 challenges. And the 10 challenges, there's various different ones. There's some that are really, really kind of technical around kind of pollution and food provision and things like that. But there's also these 2 foundational challenges. And one of them, challenge 9, is about equitable access to knowledge and kind of technology. And I'm involved in a working group on that, where we're looking at more than kind of doing ocean science, but other aspects of how as people we are studying and learning and accessing the sea and thinking about kind of capacity building. So I think that speaks quite a lot to some of the equity and equality points that have been raised. But the other foundational challenge is challenge 10, which is transforming, changing humanity's relationship with the ocean. And that is definitely the space that I'm working in. And we've got, there's so many different projects that are growing in that side of it. I guess the message would be, it's quite hard. Somehow the Ocean Decade is not as accessible, ironically, as one might like it to be, but I think some of that is kind of trying to make it your own, and you can do projects and register them as actions. They could be, you know, if there's something happening, a group of surfers want to do something, you can register it as an action on the UN Ocean Decade. It's quite easy to do as an activity rather, and that kind of helps put you in a community. There's a community there. And I guess the other thing, if I can be really cheeky and mention it, and I did put a link in the chat, is about the motion for the ocean, and it does tie, because we would really like to get it in on the Ocean Decade as an action, but it's like complicated, the different ways that things can get involved. But the motion for the ocean is like a political, like a model template of a political motion, which is how stuff gets put through in councils and governments and so on. And it's aimed at local government. And I put it in because with the conversation that what Linzi was saying about people not having to live near the sea to be an ocean citizen, it's really, really important. And that's one way to do marine citizenship, is by trying to get your council wherever you are. And wherever you are in the world, this definitely isn't just something that has to be limited to the UK. It's a bit like the Climate Emergency Declaration. So if you scroll back and find that, otherwise if you search motion for the ocean, I'm sure it'll come up. But that's another way to do something right now, and maybe that will prompt some thinking about what kinds of action surfers could be doing as marine citizens as well.
Amazing. I'll send out any of the resources that we've talked about to everyone that's attended here as well, and as well as putting them on the Citizens of Surf webpage, so that you can always check back. And Jan also mentioned that the UN Ocean Decade Conference is happening in Barcelona next year, and actually Citizens of Surf should be there. We've applied to do a really short talk, and we'll try and do some outreach with some of the surfing community that might be in Barcelona or might be attending, because it's also one of the places that has done some surf citizen science. So they've pulled a manta trawl behind a paddleboard to collect microplastic data. So there's definitely a strong community there already taking part in marine citizen science using surfboards or paddleboards. So that would be great to connect with people there. Yeah, and so just we're going to wrap up, because we could probably keep talking forever about this. But I just wanted to say that this has been a really amazing introduction. I really want to thank all of the guests for attending, for giving their perspective, and all of the participants as well for being here. Like I said, the recording is going to be available. I'm hoping to run some more webinars in the coming years, next year, that are going to be focusing on data collection, so more about monitoring, also restoration of surf ecosystems, and more about communities. So there's going to be a chance to dive deeper into this topic and obviously kind of talk a lot more, but then also start to co-design together what it is that we want to know, and what is going to be the most effective thing to do with that data in order to protect surf ecosystems and the communities that kind of rely on them as well. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming, and I hope you're feeling stoked about ocean science. So stay in touch, and yeah, thanks to all the guests. If you would like to say any parting words.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.
See you soon, hopefully.
Cheers.
See ya. Bye.